How did a Leicester butcher transform from selling Sunday roasts to creating Britain's most iconic crisp empire, producing 11 million bags daily? Henry Walker started with a fish fryer and a mountain of potatoes during post-war rationing, creating what would become the nation's crisp obsession. But here's the thing. Walker's nearly didn't happen at all. The company with its controversial blue and green packets is actually American-owned. It sits at the centre of Britain's greatest food mystery and convinced millions that Cajun Squirrel is a reasonable flavour. Yet despite selling to the Yanks decades ago, Walker's remains fiercely Leicester and the undisputed king of British snacking. The story of Walker's begins not in a gleaming factory, but in a modest butcher's shop on Leicester High Street. In the 1880s, Henry Walker moved down from Mansfield in Nottinghamshire to take over an established butchery business. This wasn't some fly-by-night operation either. Walker & Sons became a proper Leicester institution, known for quality meat pies and traditional butcher's fare. Henry built a solid reputation over the decades, and the business thrived through 2 world wars. Then came 1945 and everything changed. Post-war Britain was a country on its knees, rationing was brutal, and meat was scarcer than hen's teeth. Walker's factory output plummeted dramatically as the government controlled every scrap of beef and pork. The writing was on the wall: either diversify or go under. Under the guidance of managing director R.E. Gerard, the company started looking at alternative products. They considered ice cream, they pondered various options, but ultimately landed on something far simpler: the humble potato. In 1948, with rationing still strangling the meat trade, Walker's made a decision that would change British snacking forever. They started hand-slicing potatoes and frying them in a fish fryer. Think about that for a moment. The entire modern empire started with someone manually cutting spuds and chucking them in the same equipment you'd use for cod and chips. Those first crisps were sprinkled with salt and sold for 3p a bag. Nothing fancy, no flavours, just simple salted crisps that tasted leagues better than anything else on the market. What's fascinating is that even when meat rationing finally ended in 1954, Walker's didn't return to butchery. The crisp business was booming, and they'd found their calling. That same year, inspired by the popularity of the ploughman's lunch, that pub staple of cheese, onion and pickle, Walker's introduced their cheese and onion flavour. This was revolutionary stuff. Before the 1950s, crisps were sold plain, and if you wanted salt, you got a little blue sachet in the packet to sprinkle over them yourself, like some kind of crisp chemistry set. Walker's was pioneering flavoured crisps that actually tasted of something other than potato. Interesting, right? Do you know what else is interesting? YouTube's new hype feature. Like this video and watch the magic unfold. Here's where it gets properly interesting. The Walker family ran the business successfully for 22 years, but in 1970 they sold up to Standard Brands, an American food producer. At the time, this seemed like a natural progression. A growing British company attracting foreign investment, but it was just the beginning of a corporate merry-go-round that would eventually land Walker's in the hands of one of the world's biggest corporations. Standard Brands merged with Nabisco in 1981 to form Nabisco Brands, bringing Walker's under the same roof as a whole portfolio of snack foods. Then, in 1982, Nabisco made a move that would reshape British crisping. They purchased Associated Biscuits, who owned Smith's Crisps. Suddenly, the 2 biggest names in British crisps were owned by the same company. Think about that. Your salt and shake and your cheese and onion, bitter rivals in the crisp aisle, all answering to the same American bosses. The real transformation came in 1989. PepsiCo, the American drinks giant that also owned Frito-Lay, makers of Lay's crisps across the pond, purchased both Walker's and Smith's from the French conglomerate BSN for a cool $1.35 billion. That's not a typo. Over 900 million quid. At the time of purchase, Walker's commanded a third of the UK crisp market, and Smith's had a third of the extruded snacks market. Together, they made PepsiCo the dominant player in British snacking practically overnight. Now here's what most people don't realise. Walker's and Lay's are essentially the same company operating under different brand names. That distinctive yellow packet with the red ribbon that you'd recognise from a mile away? That design was deliberately made to look similar to Lay's packaging. If you've ever travelled to Europe and picked up a bag of Lay's, you've probably had that uncanny valley moment where it looks almost exactly like Walker's, but something feels off. That's because they share the same ownership, production methods, and brand identity, just marketed differently for different regions. Still with me? I know that's a lot of corporate shuffling, but trust me, this next bit makes it all worth it. The Leicester connection remained vital, though. PepsiCo could have easily consolidated production, shut down the Leicester plant, and moved everything to massive facilities elsewhere. Instead, they invested heavily. Today, the Beaumont Lay's factory in Leicester is the largest crisp production plant in the entire world. This isn't hyperbole or marketing spin. It genuinely is the biggest, churning out over 11 million bags every single day. The sheer scale of the operation is mind-boggling, but what really sets Walker's apart is their insistence on British potatoes. Every single spud used in Walker's core range comes from British farms, from Land's End to the Scottish Highlands. They've built relationships with farming families spanning generations. Some growers have been with Walker's since 1976, with operations so close to the factory that potatoes can be harvested, graded, washed and delivered in under 4 hours. But speaking of things that are uniquely British, we need to talk about the Great Crisp colour controversy, because this is where things get properly weird. Right, settle in, because this is one of those debates that has convinced thousands of British people they're either going mad or living in an alternate dimension. The question is simple: what colour should salt and vinegar crisps be? And what about cheese and onion? If you answered blue for salt and vinegar and green for cheese and onion, congratulations, you agree with Golden Wonder and the majority of crisp manufacturers. You also disagree with Walker's. Walker's cheese and onion comes in blue packets. Their salt and vinegar comes in green. This is the opposite of what most people instinctively expect, and it's been driving Brits absolutely spare for decades. A 2014 YouGov survey found that 48% of people thought salt and vinegar should be blue, while only 32% said green. For cheese and onion, 44% wanted green, 30% blue, and 10% thought it should be yellow, which makes thematic sense when you think about cheese, but isn't happening. Now, here's where it gets spicy. Walker's insists they have never, ever changed their colours. According to their FAQ section, which exists specifically because they get asked about this constantly, Walker's cheese and onion has always been blue and salt and vinegar has always been green. They've never swapped them, not even temporarily. It's signature to their brand. But thousands upon thousands of British people remember differently. People swear blind they recall Walker's changing the colours in the mid-1980s or 1990s. Some even claim to remember a specific television advert where football teams swapped shirts to announce the change. Malcolm Green, the advertising man who created the first Gary Lineker Walker's commercial, when asked about this, said he thought there was an advert where the flavours were switched, but he couldn't quite remember the details. Look, I know this sounds completely mental, but stick with me. There's actually a logical explanation for this madness. Sort of. So what's going on? Is this a massive corporate conspiracy? A Mandela effect situation where thousands share a false memory? Or is there a simpler explanation? The truth is probably more mundane, but still interesting. Golden Wonder was the dominant crisp brand for decades before Walker's took over. They established blue for salt and vinegar and green for cheese and onion as the industry standard. Most manufacturers followed this gentleman's agreement. Walker's, however, bucked the trend from the start. When Walker's exploded in popularity during the 1990s, powered by Gary Lineker's advertising campaigns and PepsiCo's investment, millions of Brits who'd grown up with Golden Wonder suddenly switched to Walker's. Your muscle memory told you to grab the green packet for cheese and onion, but you'd end up with salt and vinegar instead. This happened so often to so many people that it created this collective false memory of a switch that never occurred. There's a theory, supported by some forum discussions from the mid-2000s, that Walker's deliberately maintained these contrary colours because the confusion actually boosted their salt and vinegar sales. People would grab the wrong packet, try the flavour anyway rather than returning it, and discover they actually quite liked salt and vinegar after all. Genius or gaslighting? You decide. The controversy got so heated that in April 2025, Walkers pulled a brilliant April Fool's Day stunt, putting up billboards suggesting they were finally switching the colours to match public expectations. The reaction was split right down the middle. Some celebrated, others were outraged, proving that by this point Walker's colour scheme had become so embedded in British consciousness that changing it would feel wrong, even though it already feels wrong to half the population. If the colour controversy wasn't enough, Walkers has spent the past 2 decades convincing the British public to vote on increasingly bizarre, crisp flavours. In 2008, they launched the Do Us a Flavour competition, challenging the public to invent a brand new crisp flavour. The response was overwhelming. Over 1.2 million people submitted suggestions. Walkers was only expecting about 250,000 entries, so this absolutely swamped them. A panel of judges led by Heston Blumenthal, the chef famous for snail porridge and bacon and egg ice cream, whittled down the entries to 6 finalists. These weren't your standard prawn cocktail or roast chicken options. Oh no. The finalists were Builder's Breakfast, onion bhaji, fish and chips, crispy duck and hoisin, chili and chocolate, and the one that captured everyone's imagination: Cajun Squirrel. Cajun Squirrel was invented by Martin Wright, an online retailer from Staffordshire. The idea sounds completely balmy, but Wright insisted it really worked. The flavour went on sale in January 2009 alongside the other finalists, and the public could vote for their favourite. Each finalist received £10,000 just for making it to the final 6. The winner would get £50,000 plus 1% of all future sales, potentially worth tens of thousands annually. When the votes were counted in May 2009, Builder's Breakfast emerged victorious with 232,336 votes, about 10,000 ahead of onion bhaji in second place. Fish and chips came third, followed by crispy duck and hoisin, with Cajun Squirrel and chili and chocolate bringing up the rear. Emma Rushin from Belper, Derbyshire, who'd invented Builder's Breakfast, won the 50 grand and the royalty deal. The winning flavour was meant to become permanent, joining the classic range. Walkers even announced it would be available indefinitely. But here's the kicker. Within a year, Builder's Breakfast was discontinued. Walkers quietly dropped it to focus on their World Cup-themed Flavour Cup competition instead. Emma Rushin's 1% royalty deal presumably dried up along with the production line, though Walkers has never publicly commented on how that worked financially. The competitions continued over the years. In 2016, Walkers created limited edition Salt and Victory crisps to commemorate Leicester City winning the Premier League for the first time. A lovely nod to their hometown. Earlier that season, they'd given Leicester fans bags of Vardy salted crisps featuring striker Jamie Vardy's image. In 2018, they launched 6 flavours representing different decades for the brand's 70th birthday. In 2022, they held a competition to find the best heart-shaped crisp with a £100,000 reward. The British public's appetite for unusual crisp competitions appears infinite. Now we come to something that perfectly encapsulates British food culture: the crisp sandwich. For anyone outside the UK reading this, yes, we're talking about putting crisps between 2 slices of bread and calling it a meal. For Americans, that's potato chips in a sandwich. For Australians, it's a chippy sandwich. For the British and Irish, it's an institution. The crisp sandwich is sublime simplicity. White bread, butter, and crisps. That's it. No mayo unless you're a heretic. No fancy sourdough because that defeats the point. You need soft white bread to contrast with the crunch of the crisps. The technique is straightforward. Liberally butter 2 slices, pile on the crisps, about 1 standard Walker's packet worth. Place the second slice on top, press down gently to hear that satisfying crunch, slice in half, and devour. And yes, before you ask, this is a real meal that millions of Britons eat regularly, not something we made up to confuse tourists. Now, where were we? This isn't some niche regional oddity either. Crisp sandwiches are mainstream enough that Nigella Lawson, one of Britain's most beloved TV cooks, partnered with Walkers in 2022 to create a recipe for the perfect crisp sandwich. Her video went viral with nearly 2 million views, introducing befuddled Americans to this peculiar British tradition. Nigella is team salt and vinegar, she's very clear on that point. Walker's hasn't just acknowledged crisp sandwiches, they've actively promoted them. In 2021, they partnered with Subway UK for a limited time campaign where customers could order crisps inside their subs. The appropriate terminology was crisp in for crisps inside the sandwich, or crisp out for crisps on the side. The campaign ran from April to May, and Subway described it as bringing a unique British delicacy to the high street. Walker's marketing director at the time said that as a nation we may not agree on everything, but we're united in the fact that a lunchtime sandwich without crisps isn't the same. They've also released limited edition sandwich-inspired crisp flavours, including cheese toasty, sausage sarnie, and the genuinely baffling cheese, cucumber and salad cream. According to people who've tried these flavours, cheese toasty was actually quite good, accurately capturing the taste of a cheese toasty with Worcester sauce. The salad cream one was apparently disgusting, tasting like beetroot after a few seconds despite smelling remarkably authentic. Walker's even published a little book of crisp sandwich recipes celebrating the British tradition of putting crisps in a sandwich, written by Max Halley of Max's Sandwich Shop fame. In his introduction, Halley describes how his mother used to make crisp sandwiches for him and his sister when they were little, folding buttered white bread around a few crisps from the bowl she and his father were sharing. Decades later, as a professional sandwich maker, he still experiments with crisp sandwiches daily, arguing that a well-applied crisp makes a good sandwich great, and a great sandwich extraordinary. The crisp sandwich represents something deeper about British food culture. We're not precious about it. We don't need everything to be gourmet or artisanal. Sometimes the best meal is the simplest: cheap white bread, salted butter, and a 30p bag of crisps. It's comfort food that costs pennies, takes seconds to make, and triggers instant nostalgia for childhood lunchtimes and school trips. Despite decades of American ownership, multiple corporate buyouts, and international expansion, Walker's has never abandoned Leicester. The city isn't just where the company started, it remains the beating heart of the operation. The Beaumont-les site is strategically important to PepsiCo's entire European operation, serving as the testing ground for new flavours and production techniques that are then rolled out across other facilities. The relationship with Leicester City Football Club deepened over the years. Walker's sponsored the club and its stadium for extended periods, cementing the connection between the brand and the city. When Leicester City pulled off the most improbable Premier League victory in 2016, 5,000 to 1 odds, Walker's celebrated with limited edition crisps. It was a perfect encapsulation of the brand's identity. Proudly local, deeply rooted in its community, but with global reach. Gary Lineker, Leicester's most famous footballing son, has been the face of Walker's since 1995. His adverts, playing off his Mr. Nice Guy image with the tagline "No More Mr. Nice Guy," became a staple of British television. Lineker has appeared in dozens of Walker's campaigns, often involving him stealing crisps or engaging in mild mischief to get his hands on a packet. The partnership has lasted 3 decades, making it one of the longest-running celebrity endorsements in British advertising history. From a butcher's shop to the world's largest crisp factory, Walker's is quintessentially British with an American twist. Henry Walker's fish fryer gambit during rationing created a brand commanding 56% of the market. The genius isn't just making decent crisps, it's understanding British culture deeply enough to know we'll vote for Cajun Squirrel, argue about packet colours, and put crisps in sandwiches without irony. A butcher boy from Leicester created something that transcended snacking and became a cultural touchstone. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit subscribe and tell me, Team Blue or Team Green?